All right, OX. So this is our second attempt or third attempt maybe at I guess capturing it. The intention is to capture a video that gives people, or at least this is what I'd like to do while we have you, is to capture a video that gives people a sense for what Daemonica is. It's quite a, I find it to be like quite a complex and deep project, and it takes kind of like Bitcoin in its early days where I imagine, and I remember people really struggling to sort of capture the significance of it. And it has taken me many attempts. But I think I'm starting to grasp it. I'm hoping that with this video, we can give people, at least an initial understanding of what it is and what its significance is. So first of all, OX, how are you holding up? I imagine it's been a pretty intense couple of months.
Yeah, it's been the most working on this project with the artists and our team has been the most fun I've had probably since high school or something. Um, Pandemic notwithstanding, I guess. But really, and I tell everybody who will listen, this project, the 2.5 or 3 months we've been working on it now, for me at least, it's been a kind of fever dream. It's so many strange synchronicities led the way. Um, Midway through it, I actually went out into the forest for 3 days and did a vision quest to try to clear my mind and prepare for this. The artist we're working with is, I wish we could say who it was, and people would kind of, I think, understand immediately that it's a real genius we're working with, and their ability to pluck things out of the ether that kind of nobody could possibly have understood when they did it, send them our way, and then we try to implement it. And this, we're kind of the engineers. Our curatorial team is working almost like engineers on this project. And the stuff that the artists, the challenges and the clues, and some of them are like literally there's 20,000 words of emails between us. And a lot of it is like, very obscure philosophy. Half of it's written in Latin. This is a really big brain that we're dealing with. And, the prompt that we gave them back in early September was, hey, it looks like this on-chain art thing is kind of blowing up. There's something new here. It's looking like a new paradigm. This was just in the wake of Loot. And they're like, yeah, I get it. Let's have a go at this. And they just started sending us these they were like cones or maxims, and we started to build it. And it's been unbelievably fun. And so, yeah, you asked me how it's been going. Sorry for the long answer, but it's been going very well. How about you?
I'm great. I am in amazement of the. I mean, we were talking with Lux on our team yesterday that we've seen since we launched Canon, like these periods where magic seems to happen. I put the creation of the K21 collection, which you were in the very thick of as well, as just looking back on it, almost miraculous, right? Like how you could get like 21 artists to create something that's never been done, and we created it all in like 3 weeks, right? Or this thing that Trippy is putting together with Matt Wagniami, right, where he showed us these photos of like a factory that looked like like Fallujah, and like 3 weeks ago, and suddenly it's this event that's going to have 100,000 people going through it, and almost like 24-hour music, and all these incredible artists, and all coming together.
If I can
And
opine,
what's that? Sorry.
if I can opine,
Yes.
when you strip away bureaucracy and institutional procedure, and you get well-meaning good people together, things can actually go really fast. That's been my big lesson of being part of Canon, because in my past life, that was never possible.
Yes. But even for us, right? Even though we don't have an entrenched institution in the middle, like I have noticed that there is like some not like regular, but there's like some sort of periodicity, right, to these spurts of like magic happening. I mean, we're always super busy, but at least my experience of it is that, periodically, say like with the launch of K21 with this event, and where I'm going to is with what I observe from the outside with Daemonica, where for some reason, for some strange reason, like all that energy seems to like catalyze into this one. And obviously, some people might dismiss it as random, right? And there's probably some truth to that. But I've just been watching, to your question of like how I've been doing, watching in amazement, seeing, obviously you've been right in the thick of it, and seeing this thing come together in such a beautiful and coherent way. And we will get into it, into the specifics of it. But I've just been in amazement, sort of the work that you and the artists have been doing. But
I'll quickly say that
yeah.
the first lesson of animism is that the universe will conspire on your behalf if you let it. And yeah, I mean that's been another aspect of this project, is kind of letting it flow, not forcing it. Yeah.
And following, but I mean, there's a lot of work in following the flow, right? It's not like floats and
Yeah, 18-hour days.
18-hour days, exactly. And so actually one question when you were mentioning, sort of the capabilities of this artist, and sort of you've been obviously, I've been CC'd on some of these email threads, which are just massive, and I look at them and they're it seems like you guys, are going back and forth and speaking a very deep and common language. Do you, I mean, obviously the artist is, has massive intellectual capability. Let me test something with, is he to get your reaction, is he or she or they like a shaman, like a modern day shaman?
It's a complicated question. Kandinsky, the kind of early 20th century abstraction artist, of kind of famous for abstraction, had this idea. I think it was in a book called something like On the Spiritual and Art. And the idea was that the artist is sort of an archetype in society, and different artists, individuals, take their turn at kind of performing this role at different moments in time. But the artist sort of like stands on top of the hierarchy of kind of human insight, and almost like standing on top of a pyramid with like an umbrella in their hand, waiting for the lightning to come. And their job is to sort of like, I think I used this expression before, pluck things out of the ether that are sort of imminent at that moment in time, and then give them form. And you can do that with painting, you can do it with sculpture, you can do it with magical practice, you can do it with talismans and creating, like the sculptors in ancient Egypt were temple priests. They were the kind of masters of the guilds. So separating artist from someone who kind of communes with the beyond, which is effectively what a kind of shaman, for lack of a kind of less problematic word, does. But to different ends. I think typically shaman, what we would typically call a shaman would kind of be called a medicine man or woman or a healer, somebody who performs a kind of healing process. And if they do the opposite, then you would call them something like a sorcerer. So I think, I almost feel like that question has to be asked, or it could be asked, only because we've kind of like stripped away the magical potential, the kind of esoteric side of the artist, because our definition of artist has become unhaunted, disenchanted. It would almost be surprising to think of an artist as somebody who could be something like a shaman. But I think they're different, but I think they both operate on the same plane. And not all artists do. There's Google crapstraction. There are, there's, and I think the NFT phenomenon will also have, the NFT art world will have its sort of like money grubbing artists and, people posing and LARPing as artists. And that doesn't mean they're not making art. It's just a different modality. And it'll have its sort of what I think of as kind of archetypal artists, people that are really, kind of wired differently and perform a function in society that allows us to construct meaning and make sense of a kind of ever-changing world that, where, like basic truths are always in motion. They change as we evolve as a species. And so, great artists have a kind of knack for being able to reveal those things to us as when the time is right.
Yeah. So basically, it shares elements with shamanism, in that, perhaps, capturing like very complex phenomena, and trying to distill it down for use by people that are perhaps not as in tune or aware, or like lightning rods. But there's maybe like some sort of creationism that is perhaps not necessarily part of the role of a typical shaman that we would picture. Is that roughly right?
Well, first of all, just, I don't want to make these bold statements about what something is or isn't without kind of qualifying it. So like this is all,
Sure.
this is all with, what I think. And
Mm-hmm.
my pseudonymous handle, OX Animist, is, it's sort of shorthand for crypto animist, which
Mm-hmm.
is a concatenation of my politics and my metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm an animist, and I'm also obviously participating in this crypto world as an anon. And for me, yeah, that like basically what an animist means to me, and I'd tell you where I got this definition, but it would risk doxing me.
Right.
Um, uh, Animism is the idea that basically animists extend personhood beyond humans into a living cosmos. So that's a bumper sticker version of it.
Mm-hmm.
And even like in the same way that the word shaman comes from, like mid 20th century word from, I think, Siberia, that then gets sort of plastered all over kind of, quote unquote traditional or indigenous cultures all over the world, that of course have their incredible differences, but all get the kind of same label in English. Animism also was almost a kind of slur. It was
Mm.
an imperial British kind of colonial slur for people
Like a
who,
proto-religion or something.
yeah, exactly. Someone that like for humans that were so primitive they didn't even have religion,
Mm-hmm.
and that like literally they couldn't tell the difference between humans and animals, and as such, as a colonialist, you could treat them like animals.
Right.
Um, and so the idea of calling oneself an animist is to kind of reappropriate that. It's a kind of decolonization or decolonial kind of gesture to
Mm-hmm.
say, I'm going to embody this and I'm going to remake it. The same way that we see, authorities all over the world, like literally rewriting dictionaries in real time now,
Mm-hmm.
with whatever they want to control in terms of language. So that's why it's political. And in terms of the metaphysics, I don't know what the artist would say. The artist might be
Mm-hmm.
like, no, I'm just really smart.
Right.
Or, I
Yeah.
have weird dreams. I don't want to put words in their mouth. And that's
Of course.
that's rule number one as a curator. But for me, if you're asking me what is an artist, I can only answer it for you from an animist frame, which is a frame in which there's more than meets the eye.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had experiences, I think all of us have, but I've had very, very explicit ones where I've been, in communion with things that are invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And those are undeniable experiences. And when you start working with an artist who, sends you a weird email that you can hardly make sense of, and then
Mm-hmm.
you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning that next night with an idea that's just burning in your head that you don't even fully understand yourself, but you have to scribble it down.
Mm-hmm.
And then you spend 4 days putting it into code and you realize that it's the perfect solution to something you didn't even know was a problem. That's a profound experience.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't think not every artist is able to offer that up. So whether or not, this artist thinks of themselves as a kind of lightning rod for, aspects of reality that are
Yeah.
otherwise invisible to others or not is kind of immaterial. That's how I experienced it.
So, that sort of I mean, I was going to leave this towards maybe the end, after we'd gone through, what Daemonica is and how it's structured and its significance, etc. But I think it's a good segue, in that, well, first of all, for the benefit of whoever might be listening, my experience of like seeing you, provide background to others on, history, architecture, mathematics, engineering, is that your really your cultural knowledge. And I mentioned, to similar extent, perhaps the artist as well, really stretches back, tens of thousands of years, back to the Romans, the Egyptians, the Druids, pre-Columbian cultures. And so for someone like myself, where as I mentioned to you before, Alex, where my cultural sort of depth like stretches back to perhaps like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Um, my normal reaction, right, when I hear things like animism, like magic, things like that, is to be, quite frankly, to a certain extent dismissive, even though at perhaps a deeper level, like we've all experienced it, right? We've all experienced that sense of, at one point or another in our lives of, as you had put it before, the universe, like, making things happen if you just let it make it happen. Mm-hmm. And one of the, as I was thinking about Daemonica, one of the realizations that I came to is that magic is real. And what helped me see that, even coming at it from like a more modern perspective, right, where I tend to approach things a bit more like materialistically or pragmatically, I'm sure you've heard that saying, any sufficiently advanced technology seems like magic to less advanced civilizations. And I was thinking about that saying this morning. I was going like, well, actually, maybe that statement is, it's really, it really throws the baby out with the bathwater. And instead, I tried any sufficiently reliable magic is dismissed as technology by civilizations that take it for granted. And when I think of the example that immediately comes to mind, when I flip that, right, and say, look, if magic is sufficiently reliable, it's dismissed as technology by civilizations that take it for granted. I'm reading this book by Sir Roger Penrose. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. It is called The Road to Reality. And I'm trying to read it because it's actually really difficult. You look at the descriptions of like hyperbolic geometry and actually like the drawings by artists like M.C. Escher, for instance, where the geometry is not real in the sense that it doesn't exist in this universe, but it exists only in a Platonic sense. But being able to understand, and when you look at it, it looks incredibly, for lack of a better term, trippy, right? And that's the kind of maths that you need to understand. For example, quantum physics. And quantum physics itself, like I'm not, an expert or anything, but the little that I understand is that it is, the fact that a particle behaves like a wave up until someone observes it, and then it becomes, observable as a particle. You could try to trick the universe into like letting you see the wave or whatever, but as soon as the universe knows that you're looking, it crystallizes into just one particle. Like how bizarre is that? Or that particles can get entangled so that if one is spinning up, the other is always going to spin down when you observe them, even if you put them on opposite ends of the universe. So if you look at that one particle that's entangled and go, okay, that's spinning up, with absolute certainty that the other is spinning down. And we, as far as I can tell, physicists, it's bizarre, right? And physicists don't have any idea why that is, or don't have any solid theories what it is. And yet that, seeming magic is what has been the biggest engine of economic growth since probably the 1960s or thereabouts. The microchip, telecommunications, nuclear energy, like all this stuff that, you know, drove the late 20th century growth came from something that, if you look deep enough, is magic. And I see, say, like the Bitcoin white paper in a very similar light, in that it was just a paper with incentives, and somehow when that is manifested, it like just clicks just right, and for some reason something that was thought impossible, and that is so simple, you know, it's just being able to transfer value without an intermediary securely, then sparks what I believe is going to be, you know, the next, you know, because, you know, so a lot of people argue that after the quantum, you know, the innovations in quantum mechanics, etc., the progress is actually slowed, and that there haven't been, you know, any massive breakthroughs in you know, in knowledge since, you know, the discovery of quantum mechanics. You know, I think blockchain could be the next one, in that it allows everyone to, it allows basically for a wider distribution of people innovating. So whether you're in India or in Pakistan, or because you have access to capital now, you can actually make an incredible living, enough to sustain yourself to innovate without having to rely on the big centers. And what's going to happen when you have a much wider base of people? You know, so I see like parallels to the Renaissance, right? Or the printing press, where you had, you know, had innovation more widely distributed. And I think magic is going to come from that. And I think that magic is already there. You know, if you look at the market caps of these massive, you know, $1 trillion market cap for Bitcoin alone, or Shiba Inu, or, you know, anything's just exploding. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're going somewhere really interesting with this, where you've sort of confounded two stories, and I think in a really insightful way. So you mentioned this sort of like progression from, you know, like you started with quantum, but you can go further back into like classical Newtonian physics, right? So the common story is like from classical to quantum, and now we're in the quantum age. But then you were like, yeah, what if the Satoshi age came after, right? So if it was like from Newton to Planck to Satoshi or something, which is a really interesting thing, because what that suggests is that the blockchain, you mentioned the printing press, and that would be the common, you know, that would be the kind of like the McLuhan, Marshall McLuhan sort of historical trajectory would be like a trajectory of a history of technologies, right? From the printing press to radio and television, and then the internet. And what's interesting about McLuhan, he had this idea that each new technology, each new kind of medium that emerges, like big stuff, like, you know, when the radio was invented, or television, or now the internet, it doesn't just supplant the old medium. It transforms it, but it also transforms the human body, because our media, in his mind, are extensions of our central nervous system. So like, you know, the television is an extension of your eyes and your ears, right? You can literally extend your eyes around the world now if somebody has a camera on the other side of the planet. And what happens when you extend your central nervous system like that, you effectively overstimulate it and effectively numb your, you know, I guess, God-given kind of biological version. And then effectively, he you know, the word he used was amputate. You effectively amputate it and replace it with media. You replace your eyes with television, you replace your ears with television, and so on. And, you know, with the internet, it's so multimodal, you basically kind of replace everything. And I think for me, the McLuhan take is an interesting one on the quote you gave from I think it was Arthur C. Clarke, who talked about sufficiently advanced technologies as indistinguishable from magic. And I've always had that's always been a pet peeve, but I've never been able to solve it. And I think you did. So I'm gonna have to roll back the tape, because, you know, I think you put very succinctly into a sentence a feeling that I've had, which is, think of it this way. If our media are forms of technology that effectively replace our nervous system, our sensory apparatus, and that allow us to extend beyond our location in place, right? Like that camera on the other side of the planet, extending your eyes through, fiber optic cables under the ocean or whatever. In that scenario, that technology, when it's introduced, doesn't just numb your existing senses, it makes you think they're insufficient or that they are deficient and therefore need to be augmented, meaning that television reinforces the idea that you cannot see from New York to Sri Lanka. But if you talk to a medicine man or woman, if you talk to a, quote, shaman, they'll tell you they can close your eyes and see Sri Lanka. They can also see the backside of Jupiter. They can also tell you what's on the other side of the moon. And there's examples of people literally doing this, like on the record, like in declassified CIA documents. There was an artist named Ingo Swann who was this incredible remote viewer that, like, he remote viewed the rings around Jupiter that we didn't know from Earth even existed until 6 months later when one of the Voyager spacecrafts passed by it. So, shamans will tell you they can see at a distance.
Oh, all right, I'm back. This time, thankfully, it's saved, so we can keep going. Yeah. So OX, last I heard was you were talking about something about a maxim and about Arthur C. Clarke.
Yeah, I was maybe it crashed because the like stack of parallel threads I was going down got too deep. So let me try to, like, I was getting to the end anyways. So let me try to summarize.
Yeah.
Your quote about your sort of take on Arthur C. Clarke, I think, is incredibly insightful. The problem with Arthur C. Clarke's idea that any sufficiently advanced technology looks like magic to kind of, primitive civilizations or whatever, however it goes. The problem with that is it doesn't give kind of primitive civilizations enough credit. It assumes that they don't have their own magic. Because maybe from the other side, from a quote unquote primitive civilization, maybe technologies look stupid because, our televisions that can see across the world and extend our eyes that way cannot see the backside of the moon. And for them, maybe that seems quite primitive. Right. So I think, so your take, cultures that don't, that take them for granted, I think is really interesting. And I think, this is the difference, between kind of, I think, masculine and feminine cultures. Feminine cultures that actually elevate, the healers to positions of kind of, for lack of a better word, authority, rather than, petty tyrants and authoritarians that we're also used to kind of, slaving under these days. Those cultures, they elevate the people that are much more sensitive because they give better data of what reality even is and where things are going. And in your kind of timeline where you said, go from kind of Newton to Planck to Satoshi, I think it's really insightful because what that says is you're looking at it not from the Arthur C. Clarke point of view, but from the upside down, where you can blend together physics, Newtonian and quantum, into the same timeline as you can a technology, because I think what you just said is that Bitcoin is, or the blockchain is not a technology, it's a form of magic. Right. And that's I think the jumping off point for Daemonica is that if you think of it as magic, and Terence McKenna has this incredible quote, I've got it in this little presentation here, where he says, if it's real, it can take the pressure. And he's talking about psychedelic experiences and the things that you kind of encounter and invisible and things that you can encounter. But I think you could treat the blockchain the same way, and that's what we did with Daemonica. We said, a subset of it, on-chain art, art that's been kind of generated on-chain. If you think of that as a rule set, a set of axioms that creates its own universe, a universe that's only just now starting to emerge and take shape with, the hundreds or potentially thousands of artists that are building things this way for the first time ever. If you take a magical approach to that, you might get a lot farther than if you just take a purely technological one, because Bitcoin itself is a piece of magic.
Yeah. That's I guess the significance of it for me was less, whether Arthur C. Clarke or whoever was being sort of treating like primitive cultures like with disdain.